I was ordered to speak the truth of what we found beneath Caltha Ridge, though I doubt any truth can withstand what waits in the dark. We were a survey detachment of the 117th Calthan Infantry, seconded to the Adeptus Mechanicus for what was described as a routine verification of subterranean anomalies. That is the phrase they used in the order subterranean anomalies. It sounded innocuous, clinical, and for that very reason I distrusted it. Nothing in this galaxy is innocuous. We made our descent on the 34th day of the siege's aftermath. The ridge was still bleeding ash from the artillery barrages that had pounded it, and the soil shifted like sifted bone dust beneath our boots. Our convoy was a mix of chimera transports and lumbering servitors dragging the Mechanicus gear. The tech priests had warned us that Auspec's readings were distorted, but they did not explain the distortion. I suspected even then they knew more than they said. The entry shaft had been blasted open by heavy ordnance, revealing a jagged cavern mouth lined with obsidian shards. We advanced in file, lascans slung, respirators clipped in place. The air grew colder with each meter we descended, yet at the same time my tongue detected the taste of iron, like blood misted through the atmosphere. It should not have been possible. No bodies lay here, no pools of gore, yet every breath was coppery, cloying. It was the Vox that first betrayed the place. Our net began to crackle as soon as we lost line of sight with the surface. At first, it was just static, the kind we expected from subterranean interference. But then the static resolved into shapes. It became a sound, a human sound, screaming, at first faint, like someone far away, carried through layers of stone. We thought it was the echo of combat above, delayed somehow, warped by geology. But no battle raged on the surface anymore. The war was done. The screams did not cease. They came and went in waves, sometimes distant, sometimes pressing against the Vox as though the throat were right beside us. None of us spoke of it at first. Soldiers are used to strange noises in old earthworks, but the Mechanicus noticed. The Enginseer in charge of telemetry, Magos Hester, began recording the signal, his mechanical voice muttering Ben-Heric invocations. He insisted it was not any known frequency, that it registered patterns beyond vocal range. Organic binary, he called it. None of us knew what that meant. We set the first camp in a broad cavern shaped like an upturned bowl. The walls glittered faintly, as though minerals sweated from within. The tech priests placed sensors and pylons, their servitors hammering data spikes into stone. We arranged perimeter lights and watch posts. There was no immediate threat, yet the men moved nervously, fingers tied on triggers, eyes always lifting toward the shadows in the cavern's dome. The place had presence, as though it breathed with us during the first watch rotation. I walked the perimeter. My boots struck the stone, and I swore the surface yielded underfoot like stretched leather. I tested it with my hand. For a moment, I thought it was solid. Then, subtly, undeniably, it gave way under pressure, plying like muscle beneath skin. I snatched my hand back and whispered the litany of stone. My breath fogged before my face, though the temperature gauges read normal. I tried to reassure myself it was fatigue, battle shock, imagination. But the longer we stayed, the harder it became to believe that. The screams on the Vox grew louder. They threaded through the air itself, not just our devices. Sometimes, when we removed the earpieces, we still heard it faintly, like vibration inside our skulls. The men asked for blessing rites. The regiment's attached confessor led us in the catechism of iron resolve, his voice echoing strong. Though I saw sweat soaking through his collar, he was afraid. We all were it was on the second rotation that the first man vanished. Trooper Harl, quiet and reliable, was assigned to patrol the camp's outer ring. I remember speaking to him not 10 minutes before he disappeared. He had complained of a pressure in his chest, like the descent had stolen half his lungs. I told him to endure it. He gave a tired smile, saluted, and carried on. That was the last time any of us saw him whole. His Auspex reading faltered suddenly, then went flat. We assumed Vox drop and moved to his last location. The patrol found nothing but his laskin and his Vox bead. The weapon lay untouched, still charged, no scorch or blood nearby. The Vox bead, though, was active. When we tuned to it, we heard breathing, not the static of interference, actual breathing, ragged, panicked, close. We thought Harl was trapped in a fissure. We spread out, searching the stone, but the breathing grew louder, and then it shifted. It became sobbing, desperate, wet with mucus. We followed the sound, each step echoing off walls, each echo returning wrong, as though other voices joined in. Yet we never found Harl. The only thing we had was the bead, still slick with condensation, still pulsing with his impossible cries. The Engenseer suggested the beat had somehow imprinted his last moments, playing them back as if alive. The confessor declared it a blasphemous echo, a soul trapped and denied the Emperor's light. Arguments rose, fear mounting with every passing second. I cut them short, commanding silence. But inside myself, I was shaken. I have seen death. I'd have seen men torn apart by artillery, atomized by plasma, trampled by machines of war. Death is common, and in its commonness, it becomes almost merciful. But this was not death. This was persistence beyond it, a refusal of the natural order. They hear a man breathing when his body was gone. They hear sobbing when his throat had no flesh. This was not death. This was something else. We gathered back at the camp, but we could not shake the sound. The Vox bead was placed in a sealed box, wrapped in purity seals, and buried beneath the center of our formation. Still, faintly, through the earth, we heard it breathing. When I lay down to rest, my dreams were filled with the echo of those cries. They threaded through my sleep, weaving sorrow into every thought. I awoke gasping, lungs raw, as though I had been screaming all night myself. Around me, other soldiers did the same. Not one man slept in silence. That was our first night beneath Caltha Ridge. That was the first truth that broke. A man could vanish entirely, and yet his cries would remain. The Mechanicus called it signal. The priest called it damnation. I only knew it was wrong. And then, in the final watch of that cursed night, we heard something else. Not a scream this time, not sobbing. Something heavier, something deeper. The Auspex lit up with readings, mapping impossible structures further below. It pulsed across the displays like lines of a body, curved and ribbed. The machine spirits were drawing us a map that looked less like stone and more like the anatomy of a man. The second day beneath the ridge began with silence, but it was the kind of silence that is not absence of sound, but its distortion. The men spoke little, and when they did, their words seemed swallowed before they reached another's ears. The confessor led a morning litany, but his voice echoed strangely, rebounding from the cavern walls like it belonged to someone else. We tried to believe it was the stone. We tried to believe a great many things in those hours. Magos Hester spent the dark interval poring over Harl's Vox bead. He claimed the noise patterns were not random at all, but structured, layered in tiers of frequencies no human organ could produce. I overheard him muttering Ben Herrick, fingers twitching as if typing invisible commands. When I asked him what it meant, he only said, "The signal bleeds." His mechadendrites tapped nervously, and though he was more machine than man, there was fear in his tone. I could not stop thinking of the map the Auspex had produced before we slept. Its curves had resembled ribs, its voids like cavities where lungs might hang. At dawn cycle, I ordered a patrol to sweep deeper toward the readings. I did not voice my suspicion aloud, but I carried it in silence, that we were not moving through stone at all. The first chamber we entered was narrow, so much so that each man's shoulder brushed the next. Our lumen packs sent shafts of pale glow across the walls, and it was there that the truth pressed itself against my hand once more. The surface was not rock, not truly. The texture looked like granite, but when I pressed a glove to it, the material yielded, shallowly, subtly, like pressing into hardened flesh. Some of the men noticed too, though most pretended not to. Soldiers learn early to ignore what cannot be endured. We moved on, following the Auspex. That was when the scream came again, not over Vox this time, but through the stone itself. It vibrated beneath our boots, trembling the walls, so that grit rained down in curtains. The men froze, weapons raised. The cry was long, low, and it shifted from human range to something deeper. A note like the groan of tectonic plates. It sounded like pain stretched over centuries. When the sound died, Private Kellen said his name. Only his name. We stared at him, and he swore he had not spoken. Yet all of us had heard it. A whisper threaded beneath the scream. Our names. The confessor marked the walls with the sign of the Aquila and declared this place a reliquary of martyrdom, a site where the faithful had perished and their cries remained as testimony. He said this with confidence, but I watched his hands tremble as he made the mark. Hester corrected him with clinical detachment. This is not memory. This is transmission. A pulse not extinguished. He scraped a sample from the wall, and as his mechadendrite scalpel pierced the surface, the stone quivered like muscle pricked by a needle. A droplet of moisture welled from the incision. He collected it in a vial. When the lumen struck it, it shimmered red. One of the guardsmen gagged and muttered it smelled like blood. We pressed deeper. The auspex displayed shapes now unmistakably human. Arches like ribs curving overhead, recesses like organ cavities, canals that extended like veins. We moved as though walking through an anatomy lesson made colossal and impossible. Each chamber resembled another part of a torso, until we entered one vast hollow where the air itself shifted. The hollow was shaped like lungs. The massive cavities rose and fell with the faintest vibration. The walls expanded subtly, then contracted again, and as they did, the air within the chamber moved. A slow inhalation, then exhalation. It was not constant, but it was present. The entire chamber was breathing out at first. We thought it a trick of pressure differences, but then the breathing synchronized. I felt my chest expand, and the chamber's expansion matched mine. When I exhaled, the cavern sighed. Others noticed too. We all froze, each man holding his breath. The chamber held too, as though waiting for us. When we could no longer endure, when one man gasped desperately for air, the chamber exhaled with him, sending dust and ripples across the ground. That was when Trooper Danik collapsed. His respirator hissed wildly, his chest convulsing as if something pressed from within. We tore off his mask, but no wow was visible. His eyes bulged, blood vessels rupturing, mouth opening in silent scream. His breastplate warped outward with a crack, and when it split, ribs were visible, but not his own. They were extrusions of the chamber, bone pressing through his flesh, forcing its way outward. He died in moments, his body an unnatural cage of new bone. The priest declared it possession. Shrieking liturgies as we backed away, Hester examined the corpse without hesitation. His metallic fingers traced the extruded ribs. "It is not implantation," he said. "It is resonance." His body mirrored the structure around him. We did not argue. We only carried the body back to camp, wrapped in tarpaulin, elated in silence. The men whispered prayers. The priest ordered the site consecrated, but his voice faltered, as though he no longer believed. That night, the breathing grew louder. Even in the outer cavern where we had camped, the sound followed. The vox crackled again, not screams this time, but low vibrations, like the hum of a vast heart somewhere in the deep. The auspex flared with signals, pulsing rhythmically. A heartbeat. That was what it resembled, steady, insistent, impossible. We sat around the glow lamps, each man silent, listening to the pulse echo through stone and marrow alike. Some swore their own hearts matched it, sensing to the rhythm, without consent. Others clutched at their chests, muttering that they felt it in their veins. I tried to write a report, but every time I put stylus to paper, the beat made my hand falter. Ink smearing across the page. I stared into the dark and thought of Harl, still sobbing inside that buried vox. Of Danik's chest tearing open as bone forced its way free. And I wondered how many more of us would be claimed before the truth was spoken. Then came the final sign. The auspex spiked, lights glaring, alarms shrieking. The display resolved into a single image, a titanic door deep below, formed not of metal or stone, but bone. It flexed faintly, like muscle under strain. And then, before our eyes, it opened though we were nowhere near it. The machine spirits mapped its motion regardless. As if the whole tomb wanted us to see, we stared into the light of the auspex, silent, knowing we had been invited in. The deeper we went, the more the tomb revealed itself as something that had never been stone. Each step carried us away from the world we thought we knew, into a space that shifted under every lumen flare and auspex ping. The map Hester's devices traced no longer resembled tunnels or caverns, but diagrams of anatomy, enormous and obscene. What had seemed like ridges were ribs. What had seemed like hollow chambers were lungs. What had seemed like random channels now connected like veins. It was a body, but it was also a place, and both were wrong. The men no longer tried to deny what they saw. They marched quietly, weapons clutched, lips whispering prayers. Some rubbed small icons of the Emperor until the skin on their thumbs bled. The confessor declared that we were walking through the corpse of a saint, interred in the earth by divine will, and that the screaming we heard was its endless intercession on behalf of the faithful. No one corrected him, but his words rang hollow, like brass struck too many times. Magos Hester countered with his own gospel, a mechanized monotone of equations and logic. He called the structure organ architecture, an integration of biology and geology beyond mechanicus precedent. He said it was not a corpse at all, but a living machine, a macroorganism designed for function we could not yet decipher. When he spoke, his voice rasped, as though his own vox implant was distorted by proximity. I could not tell which explanation I dreaded more, a dead saint or a living machine. Both suggested we were trespassers in a realm where nothing human should remain. We pressed on through a narrow artery of stone flesh, its walls slick with condensation that tasted of salt when it dripped on our lips. The sound of sobbing followed us, faint but constant, as if someone wept behind the walls themselves. Some of the men swore they heard words in it. Please. Begging. I heard nothing distinct. Only sorrow stretched a long dot after an hour's steady descent. We entered a vast chamber shaped unmistakably like a thoracic cavity. Rib-like arches curved overhead, each the size of a hat block, their surfaces slick and pale. The walls glistened as though alive with sweat. When our lumen swept across them, the stone seemed to twitch, contracting slightly before stilling again. One guardsman vomited into his respirator, choking as the bile backed up his mask. Others tightened their seals as if to keep the place out. Hester ordered his servitors to scan. Their auspex arrays confirmed what our senses already told us. The resonance in the walls pulsed at a rhythm consistent with biological respiration. The whole chamber was breathing again, though slowly, too slowly for any creature we knew. We set a perimeter near the chamber's far end while Hester and the confessor argued. The priest insisted the place be consecrated immediately, declaring it a cathedral made of the emperor's own martyr. The Magos demanded further data, claiming to hear signals layered within the heartbeat itself. Their quarrel ended only when the auspex emitted a sudden shriek, its displays resolving into something far worse than argument. The walls were shifting, not visibly, not in any gross movement, but the sensors registered continuous microscopic contractions, timed like peristalsis. We were inside something's anatomy, and it was beginning to notice. Private Rennick cried out then, dropping his laskin. He swore the walls were whispering his name. We thought it madness, battle nerves, until others heard it too. One by one, soldiers stiffened, eyes darting to the stone. I pressed my ear against the surface in defiance of reason. For a moment, there was nothing but the hollow thrum of my own pulse. Then, faint, unmistakable, came a voice, my name, drawn out, mournful, as though called by a dying relative. I recoiled, whispering the Emperor's name. The walls pulsed once. In answer, Hester muttered that the structure was interactive, that it was listening, adapting to stimulus. The confessor screamed that it was mockery, a demon in flesh. Both may have been true. We were about to withdraw when a fresh auspex sweep revealed yet more impossibility. The chamber ahead mapped not as stone at all, but as the hollow of a human heart, enlarged to obscene scale. For chambers, valves like gateways, and at its center, a pulsation strong enough to register as seismic activity. Hester called it the central resonance node. The confessor called it the heathen heart. To me, it looked like destiny, drawing us in whether we chose it or not. We advanced cautiously, but the walls seemed to press closer with every step. The sobbing grew louder, merging now with groans and rattles like bones shaking in a coffin. The temperature climbed, sweat drenching our undersuits. My lungs felt to full, as though inhaling more than my body could contain. Every breath seemed stolen from the chamber, shared with its vast respiration. That was when we found the mark. At first, I thought it a natural fissure, but closer inspection revealed a pattern carved into the wall. Not carved, not etched, but grown. The lines were raised, ridges of bone-like tissue, forming an arching symbol I did not recognize. Hester recorded it in silence, his mechadendrites twitching nervously. The confessor spat and declared it the mark of heresy, though he could not name whose. The men crossed themselves, muttering oaths. I felt only a tightening in my gut, as if I had seen the first letter of a sentence to long for human eyes. We carried on, unwilling, yet compelled. The chamber narrowed again, forcing us into single file. The walls pressed closer, slick and quivering. Every lumen flicker cast shadows that looked like moving figures at the edges of sight. I kept expecting a hand to reach out of the wall, to seize my arm and pull me in. Finally, we reached the far threshold, where the auspex readings spiked into chaos. Ahead, across a final descent, was the thing that waited, the heart. Its pulse hammered through the earth, steady, unrelenting. The Magos whispered benheric invocations. The confessor prayed aloud, and the men just stood, staring at the abyss where stone became flesh and flesh became the boundary of sanity itself. It was then that the first of the Vox units activated on its own. No one touched it. No one spoke, yet the bead crackled to life. A voice came through, unmistakable. It was Harl, the trooper we had lost on the first day. He was still sobbing, still breathless, but now his voice was layered with others. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, each overlapping, screaming and whispering and through it all. Beneath every sound, we heard the same rhythm, repeating, relentless. The heartbeat. It was closer now, so close I thought my own chest would rupture to match it. I realized then that we were not explorers, not soldiers, not even witnesses. We were prey, wandering through the anatomy of something that lived in ways beyond flesh or stone, something that wanted us to follow, to learn its shape, to become part of it. And as I stared into the trembling dark, I knew we would obey. We descended toward the chamber with a dread that had no name. The air thickened until each breath felt stolen, not granted, as if inhaling from another's lungs. Every step carried us closer to the sound we could no longer deny, a heartbeat, colossal and steady, pounding through the very marrow of the stone flesh. It was not only sound, but sensation, a pressure behind the eyes, a shudder in the bones. We were walking not merely into a place, but into the rhythm of something that owned us. The men grew restless. Some muttered that their armor seals were failing, that they tasted blood in the air. Others whispered of faces forming in the walls, watching, mocking. I did not see faces, only shifting shadows and wet gleams, but that was enough. One guardsman tried to turn back, panic overtaking discipline. He made it 3 steps before the Vox howled and his scream filled our ears. His body twisted as if wrenched by invisible hands, his spine snapping with a crack like a snapped banner pole. He was dragged into the wall, swallowed without resistance. There was no mark left, only a wet stain like condensation. We did not speak of it, but none of us thought to retreat again. Magos Hester seemed exhilarated, his mechadendrites writhing like snakes. He chattered in Ben Herrick, muttering of data streams buried in the pulse. He claimed the walls were transmitting, that they carried signals, layered and recursive, a chorus of information not meant for human comprehension. The confessor countered with fury, declaring the place a blasphemy against the emperor's design, a pit where martyrdom had been inverted into desecration. Yet even his prayers faltered, his voice breaking as the heartbeat drowned him out. We reached a precipice then, a ledge overlooking the impossible. Before us stretched the heart. It was no metaphor, no poetic likeness, but a true organ, vast as a fortress, suspended within a cavern that might have been dug by gods. For chambers contracted and released in endless rhythm, their valves slamming like thunder. Each beat shook the ground, dust falling from above in choking clouds. Black fluid oozed from arteries the size of rivers, disappearing into channels carved deep into the bedrock. The sight was obscene in its scale, but worse than its size was the certainty that it was alive. No one spoke for a long time. Even the Magos fell silent. The only sound was the pulse, the steady insistence of something ancient and eternal. I felt it in my teeth, in my skull, in the fragile cage of my ribs. It was a rhythm that predated humanity, predated Terra itself, a beat that had waited buried until we came to listen. The confessor was first to break. He fell to his knees, arms raised, tears streaking his face. He shouted that this was no enemy, but a miracle, the very heart of the emperor preserved beneath the soil of this forgotten world. His words were half mad, his voice cracking with ecstasy. Some of the men joined him, weeping openly, their faith too broken by fear to do anything but surrender. Others recoiled, swearing that no god of man could bleed black. Hester advanced to the edge of the ledge, lowering a servo probe. It descended into the air toward the throbbing organ, its sensors casting a dull green glow. The device had not reached halfway when the Vox crackled again. It was the same chorus as before, the voices of the lost, but now layered with clarity. Each voice spoke a different word, a fragment of a sentence too vast to comprehend. Together they built a language without grammar, a scripture of despair. One voice rose above the rest, distorted, yet unmistakably human. It spoke my name. I wanted to deny it, to pretend it was trickery, but I knew the voice. It belonged to my brother, dead these 10 years on another front, his body vaporized by Xeno's plasma. I heard him now, begging, pleading for release, his tone thick with agony. My blood froze. I felt the heartbeat grow stronger, faster, as though responding to my recognition. The Magos shrieked in Ben Herrick, a screech that made the servitor spasm. His probe reached the heart, its mechadendrites piercing the glistening tissue. The reaction was immediate. The entire cavern convulsed. The walls clenched like a living throat, dust and fragments raining down. The heartbeat thundered, now deafening, overwhelming thought itself. The probe dissolved before our eyes, its metal corroding as though decades of decay consumed it in seconds. Hester screamed as the feedback surged through his implants, smoke venting from his robes. His scream did not end when his Voxcaster melted. It continued, raw and wet, as if his own lungs had joined the chorus. The confessor roared in defiance, lifting his icon high, chanting prayers so loud his throat bled. He declared that he would cleanse the chamber with flame, that no false heart could defy the God Emperor's light. Before anyone could stop him, he hurled his censer into the abyss, its chain rattling as it tumbled. It landed on the surface of the heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the organ shuddered, and a geyser of black fluid erupted, splattering the ledge. Drenching us in warmth that smelled of iron and ash, the guardsmen panicked, firing blindly into the abyss. Lost shots vanished into the void, sizzling against wet flesh without effect. The cavern answered not with death, but with sound. The sobbing that had followed us now rose into a scream, vast and unbearable. It shook the marrow of our bones, split the air into jagged shards of agony. I saw men claw at their ears until they ripped them bloody. I saw others convulse as if struck by lightning, their eyes rolling back. The heart thundered in time with the screaming, and I realized the two were one. The pulse was the cry was the pulse. It was not merely alive, it was suffering. I staggered, half blind, my respirator clogged with black fluid. Through the chaos, I saw something move within the chamber. Not flesh this time, but forms. Silhouettes of men, women, children. Their shapes rippling beneath the surface of the organ as though trapped within its tissue. Faces pressed outward for a moment, eyes wide, mouths open in endless cry, then sank back into the flesh. They were not illusions. They were the voices we had heard, the souls bound into this thing's anatomy. Screaming their existence with every beat, the confessor collapsed, his faith broken by sight itself. Hester writhed, half mechanical, half melted, still alive only because the machine within him refused to die. The soldiers either prayed or cursed, but none dared advance. I alone stood staring at the heart, its massive valves opening and closing like cathedral gates, each beat threatening to crush my mind. I understood then what the place was. Not a tomb, not a saint, not a machine. It was a prison, and the heart was its lock. Each voice was a captive, each beat a chain, and we had touched it, disturbed it, made it remember its hunger. The final thing I heard before the blackout was my brother's voice again, clearer than ever. He did not beg this time. He commanded. He told me to open the way. I awoke in darkness, the stench of iron and rot thick in my lungs. The others lay scattered across the ledge, motionless or twitching in their half-sleep of madness. My armor's auspex sputtered with static, its readings useless. The only constant was the pulse, slower now, but heavier, each beat like the tolling of a cathedral bell deep underground. My brother's voice lingered in my skull, not fading with waking, but persisting. A constant whisper just beneath the skin of thought. He told me to rise. He told me to listen. When I stood, I realized the cavern had changed. The heart still loomed below, swollen and obscene, but the walls were shifting, reshaping like wax beneath flame. Passageways stretched where none had been before, corridors curling away from the main chamber like arteries leading from the organ. They pulsed faintly, opening and closing, inviting, breathing. The architecture of the tomb was no longer stone, but flesh. We were inside something that was alive, and it was opening itself to us. The guardsmen stirred. Their fear was raw, their eyes wide, but none dared speak above a whisper, as though words might awaken the cavern further. One of them vomited black bile into his respirator, choking on the same substance that drenched our armor. Another simply sat and wept, muttering prayers in a child's cadence, the kind taught in Schola Progenium dormitories. None of it seemed to matter. The heart listened, but it did not care. Magos Hester lived still, though his body was ruined. His mechadendrites twitched uselessly, corroded stumps dripping black. The vox synth across his chest sparked with every labored exhalation. Yet his eyes gleamed with revelation. He rasped through cracked speakers. It grows. It waits. It remembers. His voice was more machine than flesh now, but the meaning pierced me. He was not afraid. He was awed. The confessor had broken entirely. He clutched his icon, smeared with black ichor, and rocked back and forth. His prayers reduced to fragmented syllables, stripped of grammar or sense. Light flame. No, no flame. His blood is here. He pressed the icon to his face until it cut him, his blood mingling with the ichor. I had seen men lose faith before, but never like this. He was not renouncing the emperor, he was trying to graft him into this nightmare. As if bending the creed could protect him from the truth, a tremor shook the ledge, nearly throwing us into the abyss. From the passages came a sound, faint at first, Then rising, the sound of footsteps. Not boots, not armor, but bare flesh slapping against wet stone. Many feet, too many. The men raised their lascans in panic, their muzzles shaking. I wanted to order them to fire, but my throat was dry, my tongue heavy. As if the cavern itself weighed down speech, shapes emerged from the nearest corridor. At first I thought them human, but the longer I stared, the less certain I became. Their skin was pale, slick with the same black fluid. Their bodies twitched with each beat of the heart, moving not with their own will, but in time with the pulse. Faces half familiar stared back at us, faces I knew, faces my men knew. Family members long dead, comrades lost in forgotten battles. One soldier dropped his weapon, whispering his mother's name. The figure that wore her face opened its mouth, and a scream poured out, not from lungs, but from the heart itself. The sound knocked us to our knees. Last fire erupted wild, bolts of energy lancing into the corridor. The things collapsed when struck, but instead of falling, they burst into rivulets of black ichor that crawled back toward the heart, absorbed by its vast tissue. Every kill only fed the prison. Every shot was meaningless. I dragged the confessor to his feet, but he fought me, shrieking that we must let them through, that they carried the emperor's burden, that salvation was written in their flesh. His madness spread like contagion, infecting the weakest among us. The guardsmen lowered their rifles, staggering forward into the corridor. They embraced the shapes that came for them, tears running down their faces. They did not resist as the pale figures dissolved around them, merging into their flesh. Their screams became the chorus, their bodies breaking apart until they were nothing but echoes in the pulse. Magos Hester recorded everything, his remaining optics glowing with cold hunger. Symbiosis, he croaked. Integration protocol. Flesh into resonance. We are witnessing architecture built from souls. He reached toward the corridor with his ruined mechadendrites, eager to join. I pulled him back, and his vox emitted a metallic shriek of rage. The sound of machine denying flesh. The guardsmen who remained loyal pulled back in formation. But the ledge was narrowing. The walls themselves shifted, pushing us toward the new corridors, herding us like cattle into the arteries of the beast. I realized then that retreat was no longer an option. The tomb had decided our path. The only question was whether we would walk willingly or be devoured. The heart's voice surged again. A scream to vast beast sound. It was thought, transmitted directly into our skulls. It showed us flashes, cities consumed, hives crumbling into living matter, ships hollowed and refilled with flesh that pulsed in rhythm with the void. It showed us stars darkening, light itself recoiling, and beneath it all, I heard my brother once more. His voice was calm now, steady, commanding. He told me the prison had been broken, that it had been waiting for a key. He told me I was that key. I do not know if it was truth or trickery, but when the walls pressed closer, forcing us toward the corridors, I did not resist. The others followed, some with dread, some with devotion. We entered the artery. The walls were wet, pulsating, slick with black slime. Each step sank into the flesh, and every contact sent shivers up my legs. It was like walking through a living throat. The confessor sobbed with joy. The Magos whispered calculations. The guardsmen muttered prayers to no one. Behind us, the ledge collapsed into the abyss, sealing our retreat. Ahead, the corridor stretched deeper, curving with the rhythm of the heart. The pulse grew louder, stronger, until it felt as though we were inside the organ itself. My auspex flickered once more, and in its static glow I saw the next chamber opening before us. Not a heart this time, but something worse, something waiting. The last thing I heard before we crossed its threshold was my brother's whisper again, not in my ears this time, but in my own voice, spoken aloud without my consent. Open the way. The corridor stretched endlessly, bending like the folds of some monstrous lung. Every step sank into the slick, yielding surface, and with each movement I felt my own flesh throb in unnatural rhythm. The pulse of the heart was no longer distant, it had become part of us. It seeped into our bones, into the marrow, guiding our motion. Hester muttered calculations in fractured Ben Herrick, his ruined mechadendrites tracing invisible diagrams in the air. Resonance amplification, integration vector, threshold imminent. His words were meaningless to the guardsmen, but to me they carried dread certainty. We were no longer walking through a tomb, but through a mechanism of flesh and spirit, and we were components in its design. The confessor stumbled forward, muttering prayers that shifted mid-sentence into incomprehensible syllables. He traced sigils onto the walls, but the symbols dissolved before the ink dried, replaced by pulsing ridges of bone and sinew. The men around him flinched at every twitch of the corridor, which expanded and contracted as though breathing in anticipation. I tried to maintain control of my unit, to keep formation, but the very air conspired against us. It smelled of iron and rot, yet also of ozone, of storm void, of a sky that had never existed. The Auspex readings were now chaotic, streaming incomprehensible numbers faster than thought could process. Every display indicated both presence and absence simultaneously, as if the sensors were detecting themselves. Then the shapes appeared. At first, only flickers at the periphery, thin and twitching, like shadows pressed against the flesh walls. I ordered the men to hold steady, to fire if necessary, but the guardsmen's faces betrayed disbelief and fear. They whispered the names of dead friends, ancestors, lovers, as though calling them back might turn the flickers into salvation. Some did not speak at all, too terrified to disturb the pulse that now felt like a living entity pressing from all sides. Hester leaned closer to the wall, his mechadendrites probing delicately, tracing lines that shimmered beneath the surface. "It responds," he whispered, voice trembling with both awe and panic. "Resonance vector adjusts. It knows we are present." The confessor screamed, a broken, wet sound that echoed in time with the heartbeat. He flung his sensor at the wall, but instead of shattering, the metal sank into the flesh, absorbed as though swallowed. Smoke and ichor mingled and rose like incense, the aroma of decay and divinity intertwined. The corridor narrowed, forcing us into single file. Each footstep echoed off slick, pulsating surfaces. The heartbeat surged, faster now, and I realized it was reacting to us. It was aware. The lights on the lumens flickered with each throb, revealing glimpses of forms trapped within the walls, torsos, limbs, faces pressed against the flesh, some screaming silently, some whispering words we could almost understand. My stomach turned. The pulse carried a knowledge that mocked logic. It was not merely alive, it was conscious, a predator measuring prey, gauging compliance and fear. Private Lorik cried out. His face had changed, eyes wide, pupils dilated to black. The wall seemed to lean toward him. Before anyone could react, a ridge of sinew extruded, wrapping around his ankle, pulling him to the ground. He fought, screamed, clawed, but the flesh tightened like a vice. His scream joined the chorus, then was absorbed. I could feel it resonate inside me, as if some of his terror had transferred through the floor. The air, the pulse itself. The confessor tried to intervene, but his hands pressed to the walls only made the surface shiver. "They are martyrs. We must accept them," he rasped, his voice a mixture of awe and hysteria. I wanted to order him to retreat, to save his life, but even my command faltered against the rhythm that had begun to dictate thought. It was subtle at first, a tugging of the mind, a suggestion that we move faster, deeper, follow the pulse without question. The corridor opened abruptly into a chamber larger than any block, domed like a cathedral, but unmistakably organic, for massive valves churned in the walls, releasing gusts of air that smelled both sweet and rancid. The pulse echoed off every surface, magnified, amplified, as though the chamber itself were a resonator. Forms now appeared more distinctly, humanoid shapes writhing within the walls, their faces pressed outward, lips moving in sync with the throb, mouthing words we could not understand. Some of the soldiers fainted, others wept openly. I held my rifle, but knew it was meaningless. No weapon in the Imperium could strike flesh this vast. Hester advanced, dragging his ruined body forward, mechadendrites scraping across the floor. "Integration," he muttered. "We can synchronize, channel the resonance, map the architecture of life itself." His voice was more metallic than human, distorted by the pulse. I recognized the truth too late. He no longer feared death. He craved union. His eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, reflecting the chamber, the pulse, the trapped souls. The confessor screamed again, flinging himself against the wall. His prayers now sounded like a corrupted litany, syllables warped into a chant that the pulse seemed to answer. A shadow moved within the air itself, a massive form, vaguely humanoid, undulating between the four valves, its chest cavity open and throbbing in tandem with the heart behind us. Its eyes, black voids, scanned us. It spoke not with sound, but with sensation, a transfer of awareness directly into my mind. I felt centuries of hunger, knowledge, and pain. The chamber, the pulse, the tomb, it was all a single entity, and we were intruders. I realized the truth. The pulse was not just alive. It was the sentinel, the gatekeeper, the prison. Every heartbeat carried a fragment of those consumed, and now it measured us, deciding who would be absorbed, who would be left. and who would become part of the architecture itself. Then the whisper came, unmistakable, my brother. His voice resonated within my skull, calm, commanding, urging me forward. The path is open. Follow the way. My instinct screamed to resist, to turn back, but the pulse had begun to guide my steps. I moved forward. The soldiers behind me followed reluctantly, their fear palpable, their prayers ineffective against the rhythm that now dictated motion itself. At the far end of the chamber, another corridor stretched outward. The pulse surged violently, walls shuddering, whispering the names of the lost. Ahead, in the darkness, I glimpsed something impossible, a door, formed not of stone, but of flesh and bone, writhing like a living seal. The heartbeat reached a crescendo, forcing our chests to convulse in sympathy. I knew we would pass through it, or perish, and as I reached for the seal, the whisper of my brother's voice merged with the pulse itself. Enter, or be forgotten. The door breathed beneath my hands, its surface quivering like muscle. I felt the pulse in my chest echo back against my fingertips, and I knew that it measured not strength or courage, but obedience. The corridor behind us had vanished, replaced by the living seal, which contracted and expanded in rhythm with the heartbeat, as though deciding whether we were worthy to pass. My brother's voice lingered, insistent and calm, threading through the cacophony of the trapped and the damned. Do not resist. Enter, or be consumed. I swallowed, tasting iron and fear, and pressed forward. The flesh yielded reluctantly, sliding open like the maw of some colossal beast inside. The chamber was darker than any void I had known, and yet the pulse illuminated everything, vibrating the air with a low hum that resonated in bone and sinew. The walls were no longer simple corridors. They had become a labyrinth of veins and arteries, twisting impossibly, folding upon themselves. We moved in single file, guided by a force I could not name. My rifle felt heavy, my respirator sticky with the sweat of terror, yet each step was compelled. Hester muttered behind me, still alive, still recording, his voice metallic, twisted by proximity to the organ. Information density, flux vectors. We can map the architecture, we can understand it, but even his madness seemed smaller here. Dwarfed by the scale of the living tomb, the confessor trailed, shaking violently, clutching his icon to his chest. His prayers were fragmented, syllables torn apart by the resonance. Sometimes his voice merged with the heartbeat itself, indistinguishable from the mass of groaning, sobbing, screaming that seeped from every pore of the walls. The men were silent, heads bowed, eyes wide, moving forward like somnambulists. None resisted, and yet fear etched every movement with hesitation. We came to a widening of the corridor, a vast atrium carved entirely of tissue. The pulse surged violently here, and I could feel it in my bones as though my skeleton had become an extension of the tomb. In the center, suspended above a slick floor, hovered a series of floating organs, malformed, fused, pulsating. They were not all human. Some were grotesque caricatures, fused from multiple species. Limbs protruded from cavities that should not exist. Eyes opened and closed in impossible rhythms. Each beat released a tide of ichor that never touched the floor, suspended midair in glistening droplets, forming patterns that my mind recognized late as symbols. Perhaps warnings, perhaps prayers. Hester approached one organ, lifting a scanning probe. The moment the device touched its surface, the entire atrium shivered. The pulse quickened, convulsing through the floor and walls. Forms appeared in the air, shadowed humanoids, some weeping, some screaming, all pressing against invisible boundaries. I saw a soldier from our squad, Private Haven, materialize among them for a brief instant before dissolving back into shadow. His eyes met mine, wide with terror, lips moving silently. Then he vanished entirely. The heartbeat did not pause. It only throbbed faster, as though it had consumed him and grown stronger for it. The confessor fell to his knees, screaming for absolution, but the pulse overrode him. His voice became one with it, a distorted echo. His prayers folded into the rhythm. One by one, the soldiers began to mimic him. Their voices dragged into the heartbeat until they were no longer distinct. Hester alone continued to speak in mechanical precision, tracing sigils of data and logic over the organs, seemingly translating the living scripture into understanding. He did not fear. He coveted it. A wall pulsed violently and a fissure opened. Through its spilled forms I could barely comprehend. Bodies half-fused, mouths open in permanent scream, limbs writhing like serpents. They pressed against the floor and walls, some clawing at the air, some leaning toward us. The pulse increased, driving the air into a vibratory frenzy. Each breath drew it deeper into our lungs, forcing the sound, the memory, the sensation into our very marrow. I felt my own thoughts fracture, disjointed images of past battles, faces of the dead, prayers I had never prayed, all layered into a single intolerable torrent. My brother's voice, calm and unwavering, cut through it. Do not fear. This is the way. It awaits you. I tried to resist, to step back, but the pulse guided my body as if my limbs were strings pulled by some invisible hand. The others followed mechanically, instinct and discipline stripped away. We moved as one, vessels for the rhythm, into a narrowing corridor that led downward. The air changed as we descended. The smell of iron thickened into copper tang, and with each step, the shadows of the walls coalesced into forms more distinct. Faces and limbs pressed against the living tissue. Some were recognizable comrades we had lost on other fronts, civilians from conquered worlds. Even Hester's own servitors, now twisted and fused into the labyrinth. They opened their eyes as we passed, and for a moment I felt their awareness touch mine. They were trapped, and yet aware, silent witnesses to our procession. Suddenly, the heartbeat faltered. A single, violent pause, like the tomb itself had caught its breath. The floating organs convulsed, droplets of ichor scattering in chaotic patterns. The air became thick with pressure, pressing inward, threatening to crush thought itself. I realized then that the heart had noticed us, truly noticed us. It was no longer merely guiding, but testing. A low whispering filled the chamber, not through vox or tongue, but directly in the skull. Each of us heard something different. The men muttered their deepest fears, the confessor his prayers. Hester a chant of numbers and equations. I heard my brother again, steady, unwavering, urging me to lead us forward. The pulse began again, faster now, and the organs above began to rotate slowly, aligning themselves in a pattern that made my stomach twist. It was architecture, ritual, and anatomy all at once, a cathedral of living flesh that obeyed laws we could barely understand. At the end of the corridor, a final wall emerged, darker and thicker than the others. The pulse surged violently, and I felt it in my teeth, in my skull, in every nerve ending. My brother's voice spoke in my own mouth. Open it. I knew without question that we would obey. The chamber waited. The heartbeat called Dot, and as my hand touched the wall, I felt it respond, quivering beneath my fingers. Alive in anticipation, as if aware that the final trial had begun, the wall yielded beneath my hands, not with resistance, but with expectation. It moved like flesh, slick and warm, pulsating with the rhythm of the heart behind us. Each throb vibrated through my bones, through my armor, through my very thoughts, forcing my mind into a cadence not my own. The corridor beyond stretched wide, an atrium larger than anything the Mechanicus had ever measured, and yet utterly organic, every surface a living membrane. Hester's eyes gleamed, metallic reflections dancing across corroded lenses. He whispered, the central nexus. It is not a tomb. It is a mind. His words were jagged, half exultant, half fearful. Like metal struck too many times, the confessor moaned, pressing his icon to the wall, as though he could anchor himself to the Emperor through faith alone. His voice fractured and melded into the pulse, becoming another voice in the chorus. The men followed, some sobbing, some staring blankly. I felt my own resolve slip with every step, but the whisper of my brother remained, a tether I could not sever. Do not resist, he said. We must see. The atrium opened fully before us, revealing the organ in its entirety. It hung suspended, a grotesque cathedral of tissue and fluid, valves opening and closing in impossible synchrony. Arteries and veins coiled through the air like bridges, channels of black ichor suspended mid-flow, feeding organs that floated like altars. The pulse was deafening, yet silent, a vibration that penetrated thought itself. Shapes pressed against the flesh walls, faces, limbs, torsos of those we had lost trapped, aware, their agony bound to the rhythm. Each beat made the ichor tremble, each pulse whispered in language older than mankind. Hester advanced cautiously, probing the suspended organs with a ruined servo probe. The moment it touched the surface, the atrium shivered violently, sending ripples through the floating masses. The pulse doubled, vibrating through the floor and walls. The trapped forms pressed outward as though trying to escape, mouths opening in silent screams that my mind interpreted as prayer. The Magos mechadendrites twitched violently, recording everything, translating the pulse into impossible sequences. Information, integration, consciousness. It listens, he croaked. His voice became mechanical, harsh, as if corrupted by proximity to the organ's awareness. The confessor wailed, praying in broken syllables that merged with the rhythm. I felt his terror seep into me, as if the pulse had absorbed his faith and was returning it warped, distorted. The men behind me trembled, their fingers clutching weapons that could no longer matter. One tried to step backward, but the corridor shifted subtly, guiding him forward like a shepherd herding cattle. I realized that resistance was not allowed. The pulse dictated motion, thought, and then a new form emerged from the far wall, humanoid, yet impossibly tall, its limbs stretched and folded in unnatural angles. Its face was a void, black eyes staring from sockets that should not exist. It moved without touching the floor, gliding along the pulse, synchronized perfectly with each beat. The voice of my brother pierced my mind. It waits. It sees. You must learn. I wanted to scream, to resist, but my mouth moved only when a whisper allowed. My thoughts were no longer my own. The atrium's floating organs began to rotate slowly, aligning themselves along a vertical axis. The ichor streams followed, forming shapes I recognized late as symbols, rituals, liturgical diagrams, sequences of geometry and number. Hester's eyes glittered, recording, translating. It is a cathedral, a machine, a mind made flesh, he whispered, awe and terror intertwined. The pulse surged in response, faster, heavier, vibrating through our very bones. The forms pressed outward more insistently now, the trap voices blending into a chorus of endless lamentation. I saw soldiers step forward, drawn to the floating organs as if by magnetism. One knelt, touching the black fluid, and his body convulsed. For a heartbeat, he was gone, replaced by a silhouette within the pulse itself. His screams joined the rhythm. Another reached out instinctively, and the chamber absorbed him instantly. His consciousness folded into the architecture of flesh. The remaining guardsmen froze, terror etched into their faces. I realized we were being tested, measured, sorted. The atrium was alive, not merely conscious, but deliberate in its choice of who would survive and who would join the organ's endless chorus. The confessor fell forward, pressing his icon into the floor. His prayers became unintelligible, blending into the pulse until it was impossible to distinguish sacred words from terror. I felt my own mind bend, thoughts fragmenting under the relentless rhythm. My brother's voice remained, steady, guiding. Look, learn. You are the key. Hester lifted his probe again. The pulse reacted violently, waves rippling outward, bending the corridor behind us. The floating organs convulsed, valves opening wider, ichor streams twisting in arcs that defied geometry. The humanoid shape advanced, reaching a hand toward us. Its touch was absence, a vacuum of sensation, yet I felt every nerve in my body flare in response. It did not strike, it waited. I knew it was measuring us, probing for understanding, testing obedience. The pulse surged again, and for the first time, I saw the heart's purpose or part of it. This was not merely a tomb or a prison. It was a repository, a machine designed to assimilate consciousness, to map the patterns of thought, to integrate life into its own architecture. Every beat, every tremor, every scream of the trapped souls was data, building a lattice of living understanding beyond any mechanicus theory. The atrium itself was a mind, and we were inside it. I hesitated, realizing the stakes. We could flee, but the corridor behind us no longer existed. The pulse had sealed us in, bending the architecture to its will. Forward was the only path. Hester's voice, metallic and distorted, urged me on. The confessor wailed, half prayer, half warning. My brother whispered again, coaxing, commanding, the next chamber awaits. Enter, or be lost to the pulse. We advanced together, forced by rhythm, tethered by necessity. Every step a surrender to the heartbeat that now dictated life and thought. Ahead, I glimpsed the threshold to the next chamber, larger, darker, and impossibly alive. The organ waited, and the pulse intensified, vibrating through my skull, through my chest, through every fiber of being. The whisper became a chant in my own voice, enter, or be integrated. The threshold loomed like a maw of living stone, yet flesh, pulsating with the same impossible rhythm that had guided us this far. The air was thick, not just with ichor and decay, but with thought itself, the weight of consciousness pressing down like gravity. I felt the pulse hammering through my chest, each beat a command I could not resist. My brother's voice lingered, calm, steady, insistent. Do not falter. The next chamber reveals truth. I forced my feet forward, knowing resistance was futile, that the tomb had already decided our fate. The atrium beyond the threshold was vast beyond comprehension, A cathedral of fused tissue and bone, walls writhing with embedded shapes, veins sprawling in fractal patterns. The heartbeat surged violently here, louder than ever, a resonance that penetrated thought and marrow alike. Forms pressed from the walls, limbs twisting, faces screaming, some familiar, others alien, all part of the living architecture. Hester moved ahead, mechadendrites probing the air, collecting impossible data, translating the pulse into numbers and diagrams that made no sense to human comprehension. It is intelligent, he whispered, voice trembling. It reacts, adapts, integrates. The confessor trailed behind, muttering prayers that had long since lost grammar or meaning. He pressed his icon to the floor, then to his chest, then against the walls, as though physical contact might anchor the sacred in this unholy place. But the pulse swallowed everything, weaving his words into its rhythm. He began to scream in joy and terror simultaneously, declaring that the Emperor's light was here, yet twisted, corrupted, impossible. I did not correct him. Words would not matter here. Only motion mattered. The soldiers moved mechanically, single file, eyes wide, weapons trembling in hands that no longer seemed under their own command. Shadows shifted in the peripheral light, flickering shapes that at first seemed human, but then elongated, multiplied, folded in on themselves. The pulse responded to our fear, amplifying its rhythm, sending vibrations that shook the floor, the walls, and the air around us. I realized that our terror was fuel. Each heartbeat absorbed it, refined it, stored it as part of the living structure. A fissure opened in the floor, revealing a chasm filled with black fluid. Faces swam within it, mouths opening in silent scream, eyes wide and pleading. The pulse transmitted their agony directly into my skull. Some soldiers tried to look away, only to find their vision forcibly redirected toward the chasm. Hester leaned over it, prosthetic limbs quivering as he recorded. Architecture of souls, lattice of consciousness. We are seeing the substrate of life itself, he muttered, almost cheerfully. I wanted to tell him to stop, to move away, but my voice would not carry. The pulse had seized thought, that we saw the anomaly. Floating above the chasm, fused and malformed, was a central organ, larger than any heart we had encountered, veins snaking outward in all directions. But this one pulsed differently. Its beat was irregular, fractal, splitting into multiple rhythms that overlapped in impossible harmony. Hester gasped, speaking in broken Ben Herrick. It is thinking. This organ. It does not just respond. It plans. The pulse reacted, surging through the atrium with such force that the walls undulated like water, carrying a sensation of nausea and awe simultaneously. The humanoid figure from before appeared again, gliding silently, its face a void, eyes black as the endless. It extended a hand toward the organ. The pulse shifted in response, a shock wave that pressed every fiber of my being into itself. I realized then that this being was a conductor, guiding the heartbeat, shaping the architecture, orchestrating the absorption of consciousness. My brother's voice, insistent, calm, commanded me forward. Observe. Understand. You are the key. I stepped closer, and the pulse hammered violently, bending thought and perception. I saw fragments of the consumed, soldiers, civilians, servants, even Hester's previous probes. Each had been integrated into the lattice, their memories, their terror, their faith absorbed, reshaped, folded into the living structure. The organ's irregular rhythm reflected a higher-order pattern, a strategy, an intelligence that mapped and stored all life it touched. I understood, in that instant, that this tomb was not merely a prison. It was a mind, an entity designed to capture existence itself, to convert thought, emotion, at will into the architecture of its being. The confessor wept, clutching his icon to his chest. Salvation, he whispered, or damnation. We cannot know. I understood. The pulse had offered us a revelation too vast, too impossible to comprehend fully. The anomaly, the fractal heartbeat, the lattice of consciousness. The humanoid conductor was not just horror. It was knowledge, terrifying and absolute. We were intruders, witnesses, and potential sacrifices all at once. Then came the choice. The central organ convulsed, and a section of the floor opened, forming a bridge of flesh and vein across the chasm. The humanoid figure gestured toward it. The pulse intensified, vibrating through every nerve, urging compliance, commanding passage. Hester's mechanical voice broke the silence. Integration protocol. We can synchronize. We can learn. His gaze met mine. I realized he was ready to step forward, to fuse his consciousness willingly with the lattice. The confessor screamed, trying to prevent it, but the pulse absorbed his words, folding them into its rhythm. I understood what the tomb demanded: submission or consumption. Forward meant risking assimilation, merging with a mind vast beyond comprehension, while hesitation guaranteed death or madness. The soldiers looked to me, eyes wide, waiting. I felt the pulse in my chest, in my skull, guiding thought, shaping decision. My brother's voice whispered, "The path is open. Enter or be lost." The bridge undulated beneath our feet, veins contracting as if alive. The pulse now a torrent, threatening to overwhelm sanity itself. Each step sent a shiver through the atrium. Faces of the consumed flickered in the walls, their silent screams pressing into memory, begging, pleading, warning. I led forward, knowing that every step brought us closer to knowledge and horror both. The atrium waited, patient and sentient, a mind of flesh and rhythm. And the next chamber loomed just beyond the bridge writhed beneath our boots, veins contracting and expanding like the heartbeat of a colossal predator. Each step transmitted the pulse directly into my bones, resonating in my skull, bending thought and will toward a single purpose. The soldiers followed mechanically, their eyes wide, rifles useless in trembling hands. Hester advanced with unnatural calm, mechadendrites quivering with purpose, translating the pulse into numbers, diagrams, and prayers that merged indistinguishably. The confessor wailed behind us, clutching his icon, begging the emperor to intervene. But the pulse ignored him, folding his words into rhythm. My brother's voice echoed inside me. Forward. The path must be opened. Witness the truth. The central organ floated ahead, suspended above a chasm of ichor-infused bodies. Its fractal heartbeat had grown irregular, overlapping in layers too complex for human comprehension. Each pulse sent ripples through the bridge, distorting perception. Faces pressed against the walls, some familiar, some horrifyingly alien. They were trapped, aware, witnesses to our passage, their silent screams vibrating in sync with the rhythm. I realized with growing terror that these were not mere victims. They were components of the living architecture, feeding, storing, and amplifying the pulse. A fissure opened in the far wall. Forms emerged, humanoid, elongated, writhing, fused with multiple faces, eyes blinking at impossible angles. The pulse surged violently as they pressed toward us, yet did not attack. They moved with purpose, guided by the rhythm, synchronized with the organ above. Hester approached them, prosthetic limbs tracing equations and runes in the air. "They are conduits," he whispered. "Not enemies. Pathways, keys, integration nodes." His voice trembled with awe, metallic distortion overlaying human cadence. The confessor shrieked, pressing himself against the wall. "Abomination! Blasphemy!" he cried, but the pulse silenced him, absorbing his words, reshaping them into its rhythm. I felt his terror seep into me, a wave of dread that bent perception, nearly overwhelming the tether to my own mind. The whisper of my brother persisted, calm and commanding, guiding forward. "Witness, understand. Do not resist." I had no choice. The pulse was no longer just external, it had invaded thought, bending will, shaping action. The bridge narrowed sharply, veins pulsating violently, forcing single file. One soldier, Private Marek, faltered. He screamed, attempting to step backward, but the pulse shoved him forward, his feet sinking slightly into the living surface. I saw his eyes widen, reflecting the organ above, and in a heartbeat, he convulsed violently, limbs twisting unnaturally, merging with the bridge momentarily, before the pulse spat him back upright. His body shuddered, twitching with residual resonance, and he whispered words he had never learned, prayers in a language older than Terra. I realized then that the pulse could imprint knowledge, fear, and faith simultaneously, folding experience into its lattice. Hester stepped forward eagerly. He placed a probe against the organ. The pulse surged, a tidal wave of sensation through every fiber of our being. Floating organs convulsed, ichor streams bending and twisting, forming symbols that rearranged themselves in real time. The humanoid conductor reappeared, gliding silently, guiding the pulse with gestures almost imperceptible. The chamber itself was aware, alive, deliberate. Hester's eyes gleamed with reverence. "Integration, understanding. We can merge," he said, each word vibrating with a rhythm almost incomprehensible to human cognition. The confessor screamed again, trying to restrain the soldiers, to pull them away from the living threshold. Some wept, others hesitated, but the pulse compelled motion. Resistance was meaningless. I understood then that the tomb had already selected who would be absorbed, and who might remain marginally intact. The choice had been made long before we arrived. Our passage was simply a fulfillment of that decision. The pulse was patient, methodical, deliberate. It did not need to coerce, it merely revealed the inevitability. The organ's fractal rhythm shifted. I felt it in my teeth, in my ears, in the marrow. Time fractured, moments stretched, contracted, overlaying themselves. Past memories, forgotten fears, prayers whispered in dormitories long vanished, they all surfaced. Unbidden, merging with the heartbeat. Private Lorik muttered names of family long dead. Another soldier repeated strategies from battles never fought. The pulse fed on these echoes, storing, amplifying, integrating. It was not only alive, it was learning, adapting, planning. I stepped closer, drawn irresistibly. The bridge arched toward the organ, suspended impossibly above the ichor. The humanoid conductor extended its hand toward the organ, and the pulse responded with a resonance that pressed through every nerve ending. I understood then that it was testing us, measuring willingness, discerning capacity for assimilation. Hester stepped forward eagerly, eyes gleaming, placing his corrupted mechadendrites against the organ's surface. A violent surge of rhythm tore through the chamber, and he convulsed, merging partially with the lattice. His screams were human and metallic simultaneously, echoing into the atrium, absorbed instantly. The confessor shrieked in horror, clutching his icon. "The Emperor save us! The Emperor!" But the pulse only intensified, folding his prayers into rhythm, blending human terror and devotion into a single resonance. I felt my own mind bend, awareness expanding and fracturing simultaneously. My brother's voice, calm and steady, guided me forward. Integration is the path. Witness fully. Lead them. I realized that our survival depended on submission, not defiance. The pulse demanded not loyalty or courage, but willingness. It was not just consuming bodies, it was shaping consciousness, storing experience, faith, terror, and memory in a lattice far beyond human comprehension. The next step would be irreversible. I placed my hand on the organ. The pulse surged violently through my body. The floating veins and ichor streams bent toward us, forming impossible symbols that throbbed with meaning. The humanoid conductor hovered above, guiding. The bridge trembled beneath us. The whispers of the lost, the cries of the partially assimilated, and my brother's calm guidance merged into a single sensation, urging, commanding, enter fully, or be forgotten. The pulse reverberated through every fiber of my being, a force beyond resistance, beyond comprehension. Each heartbeat pressed against my skull, my chest, until thought itself fractured. Hester had stepped fully into the organ's rhythm, convulsing, merging, becoming part of the lattice. His cries were human and metallic simultaneously, echoing into the atrium, absorbed instantly. The soldiers watched, paralyzed, some trembling, some whispering prayers they no longer understood. The confessor screamed, pressing his icon to the floor, muttering fractured litanies. But the pulse swallowed them, converting devotion into vibration. My brother's voice echoed insistently in my mind. Do not resist. Lead them. Witness fully. I stepped forward, compelled. The bridge of living veins arched toward the central organ, impossibly suspended over the chasm of ichor and fused bodies. The humanoid conductor hovered above it, limbs elongated, face a void, eyes black as endless night. Its gestures synchronized with the organ's fractal rhythm, orchestrating the heartbeat, guiding the pulse. I realized with terror that this being was not an enemy in the traditional sense. It was a facilitator, a curator, shaping the assimilation of consciousness with clinical precision. The soldiers followed mechanically. Private Marek whispered incomprehensible phrases, some prayers, some numbers, drawn from the pulse itself. Private Lorik's hands twitched unnaturally, moving to touch the bridge despite the terror evident in his eyes. Each touch caused a ripple through the lattice, altering the rhythm, bending the ichor streams, and shifting the orientation of the floating organs. The pulse was learning, adapting, integrating not just bodies, but actions, thoughts, instinct. I realized then that resistance was irrelevant. Only willingness or submission mattered. The confessor wailed, his icon pressed to his chest. Blasphemy, abomination. His voice fractured, melding into the rhythm. I felt his terror resonate in my bones, amplified, folded into the pulse. A force that simultaneously guided and consumed. My brother whispered, calm and steady, coaxing me forward. Witness, understand, lead them. I knew that hesitation would be fatal. The tomb would not merely reject us, it would absorb us fully, erasing identity, memory, Consciousness, Hester's body convulsed violently, merging further with the lattice. I saw glimpses of his mind, streams of data and thought folding into the organ, his memories, his fears, his knowledge of Mechanicus protocols now woven into the pulse. He was no longer fully human, no longer fully machine, no longer fully himself. Yet he remained sentient in a way that terrified and fascinated simultaneously. The pulse had chosen him as its intermediary, its node of understanding. I understood that any further step for us would carry similar consequences, assimilation, partial or total, with survival measured not in flesh, but in conformity to the rhythm. The bridge narrowed further, veins quivering violently. Each footstep sent ripples through the living surface, echoing through the atrium, bending perception. Faces pressed against the walls, silent screams vibrating in time with the pulse. Some recognizable as lost comrades, others alien. The chasm beneath seemed to widen, ichor streams rising, forming impossible geometric patterns that bent thought itself. I felt the pulse tugging at my mind, testing, probing, measuring capacity for comprehension and compliance. My brother's voice persisted. You are the key. Witness fully, the central organ convulsed, fractal pulses overlapping. I realized that its rhythm was no longer just a heartbeat, it was a language, a calculus of life, a system of mapping consciousness. Hester's convulsions mirrored the organ, his mechadendrites tracing patterns in the air that the pulse responded to, expanding, twisting, reconfiguring. I understood partially, instinctively, that the tomb itself was alive in ways that defied Mechanicus theory. It did not merely trap the dead. It stored, categorized, and even amplified them. Every scream, every prayer, every fearful thought became part of the living architecture. Private Marek faltered. He fell to his knees, trembling, muttering fragmented numbers and prayers. A vein from the bridge reached toward him, wrapping partially around his leg. The pulse surged violently. His screams merged into the rhythm, and for a heartbeat, I thought he had been absorbed entirely. Then he convulsed violently and rose again, eyes wide, whispering words in a language he could not have known. The pulse had not killed him, it had remade him as a conduit, a partial node, tethered to the lattice. Changed irreversibly, I felt my own thoughts begin to fragment, echoes of past memories, prayers, fears, and victories overlaying the present. The humanoid conductor gestured toward the organ. I understood what was required: full observation, submission, perhaps partial assimilation. To survive this chamber intact, the pulse intensified, sending vibrations through bone and marrow, forcing awareness into compliance. My brother whispered insistently, lead them, witness, survive. The soldiers followed mechanically, compelled, unwilling but incapable of resistance. The confessor fell forward, muttering fractured prayers, trying to shield the men with sacred rites that could no longer reach them. His icon pressed to the floor, the pulse bending it into vibration, absorbing the intention. I felt the weight of his fear, amplified, folded into the chamber. It was impossible to separate my own terror from the lattice. My mind screamed internally, yet my body moved forward, tethered to the pulse. My actions synchronized with the rhythm that now governed the atrium. The organ quivered, floating above the chasm, valves opening wider, ichor streams twisting in impossible sequences. Each beat pressed against every nerve ending, demanding compliance, submission, understanding. Hester had disappeared partially into the lattice, yet remained sentient, guiding us through the pulse. The humanoid conductor hovered above, orchestrating every movement, shaping the rhythm, testing the limits of human endurance and comprehension. I realized with certainty that we were at the moral and existential precipice. Forward meant assimilation, transformation, partial or total erasure of self. Hesitation meant death or collapse of mind. The pulse had already selected those who would endure, those who would be absorbed. I felt my brother's voice inside, steady, unwavering, compelling. The bridge ends here. Lead them, enter fully, or be lost. The bridge undulated beneath my boots, veins contracting like living sinew, carrying the pulse directly into bone and marrow. Each heartbeat reverberated through the atrium, pressing thought and will into conformity with its rhythm. Hester had vanished almost entirely into the organ's lattice. His voice, now only a distorted echo, carried on the pulse. The soldiers moved mechanically, bodies tethered to the rhythm, some trembling, some whispering prayers they no longer recognized. The confessor screamed continuously, pressing his icon to the floor, trying in vain to anchor sacred law against a force that had no respect for divinity. My brother's voice remained in my mind. Witness, lead, endure. The central organ floated above the chasm, valves twisting and opening with a fractal precision that defied logic. I realized the heartbeat was no longer singular, it had divided into overlapping rhythms. Multiple layers of consciousness encoded within a single resonance. Each beat conveyed knowledge, memory, terror, devotion, folded into the architecture of flesh. The floating ichor streams shifted in response to our presence, forming shapes and symbols that bent geometry and reason alike. Faces pressed from the walls, some familiar comrades, some grotesque amalgamations, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams, all vibrating in tune with the pulse. A fissure opened beneath the bridge, and the floor itself pulsed violently, forcing us forward. Private Marek convulsed, muttering prayers and sequences of numbers drawn directly from the pulse. I felt his terror imprint on my own nerves, amplified by the rhythm. One soldier tried to step backward. The bridge responded instantly, veins constricting, guiding him forward with suffocating insistence. Resistance was meaningless. The tomb dictated not merely motion, but comprehension, intention, and obedience. Hester's distorted voice called out from the lattice, a mix of metal, flesh, and thought. Integration, understanding, expansion. He convulsed violently, merging further with the organ, his mechadendrites tracing sigils in the air that the pulse absorbed and amplified. I realized he was no longer fully human, no longer fully machine, yet still sentient. He had become a partial node, a facilitator of the tomb's rhythm. The pulse recognized him, and through him, it recognized us, measuring capacity for assimilation. The confessor wailed, clutching his icon, desperate to resist. Blasphemy, Emperor, intervene. But the pulse absorbed every syllable, converting devotion into vibration. I felt his terror seep into my own thoughts, amplified, bending cognition, threading into my perception of time and space. My brother whispered again, "Do not falter. Observe fully. Lead them. Forward was the only path." Behind us, the chasm yawned impossibly, ichor swirling in geometric patterns. Reflective fragments of our own minds, fears, and memories, the humanoid conductor appeared, gliding silently above the organ. Its face remained a void, its elongated limbs gesturing with clinical precision. Each movement synchronized with the pulse, directing flow, shaping rhythm, orchestrating assimilation. I understood with sudden clarity that this being was not an enemy, but a curator of consciousness, a facilitator of the organ's integration of life into its lattice. Observation alone carried consequence. Failure to comprehend would be folded into the rhythm, absorbed, erased, remade. The central organ pulsed violently. I felt it in my teeth, my skull, every nerve ending. The lattice beneath Hester convulsed, streams of ichor twisting into impossible symbols, overlapping in layers I could barely perceive. Private Marek convulsed again, partially absorbed, his voice folding into the rhythm, repeating prayers in numbers no human could recall. The pulse tested us, demanded submission, measured capacity for comprehension and obedience. Resistance triggered violent contraction, threatening disintegration of body and mind. I took a step forward. The pulse surged, bending time, stretching seconds into minutes. My own thoughts fragmented, overlaying with memories of past battles, lost comrades, prayers I had never prayed. The bridge beneath me shifted subtly, forcing alignment with the central organ, guiding my steps, my perception, even my breathing. The confessor collapsed fully to his knees, writhing, but the pulse ignored him, incorporating his fear into its rhythm. Every ounce of terror, every prayer, every hesitation fed the lattice, strengthening the living architecture. Hester's partial assimilation became more pronounced. His eyes glowed faintly beneath corroded lenses, mechadendrites twitching as they traced sigils that bent the pulse. He convulsed violently, merging with the lattice, yet his consciousness remained faintly present, guiding us. I realized he had become a bridge, a partial intermediary, tethered between human will and the tomb's rhythm. Survival for the rest of us depended on compliance, observation, and partial submission. The bridge narrowed further, forcing single file. The chasm below yawned impossibly wider, ichor streams forming spirals and sigils that bent perception itself. The central organ pulsed irregularly, fractal rhythms overlapping in layers that pressed directly against thought. The humanoid conductor hovered above, guiding, orchestrating, measuring. Each gesture forced alignment, each beat tested capacity for comprehension. Forward meant partial assimilation, the possibility of survival. Hesitation meant complete erasure. My brother's calm voice whispered insistently, "Lead them. Witness fully. Do not resist. I felt the pulse in my marrow, in my teeth, pressing, guiding, compelling. The soldiers followed mechanically. Private Lorick muttered sequences of numbers, prayers, and names of the dead. Their cadence synchronized to the pulse. Marek shivered, convulsed, then rose, partially integrated, whispering in the lattice's language. Resistance was gone from their minds. Compliance, fear, and observation merged into a single, fragile thread connecting us to the tomb. The central organ quivered violently, ichor streams twisting, veins in the bridge contracting, floating symbols shifting. The humanoid conductor gestured again, and I understood the next chamber awaited. The pulse intensified, a tidal wave of sensation pressing thought, will, and body into the rhythm. Ahead, the threshold loomed. It promised the next stage of assimilation, irreversible exposure to the tomb's consciousness. The bridge arched impossibly toward it, veins pulsating violently, ichor streams converging into impossible sigils. Hester's faintly human voice urged us on. The confessor sobbed behind me. The soldiers followed mechanically, tethered to the pulse. My brother's voice whispered one final time, "Enter fully, or be lost to the rhythm." The organ waited, sentient, deliberate, patient. The next chamber promised knowledge, horror, and transformation beyond comprehension. The threshold before us pulsed like a living eye. Veins writhing, ichor streams arcing in patterns that pressed directly against perception. Each heartbeat hammered through bone, marrow, and thought, forcing alignment with the rhythm. The central organ floated above the chasm, its fractal pulses overlapping in layers that bent cognition. Hester had disappeared almost entirely into the lattice, his distorted voice now a faint echo on the pulse. Private Marek and Lorick moved mechanically, partially integrated, whispering prayers and numbers in a cadence that synchronized with the organ. The confessor screamed behind us, pressing his icon to the floor. Muttering prayers, the pulse immediately converted into rhythm. My brother's voice was calm, insistent, guiding, enter fully. Witness the truth. The chamber beyond the threshold yawned impossibly. Walls of fused tissue stretching into darkness. Floating organs rotated slowly, ichor streams forming spirals and sigils that defied geometry. Faces pressed against the walls, some familiar, some grotesque, mouths open in silent screams, all vibrating in time with the pulse. The humanoid conductor hovered above, limbs elongated, gestures precise, orchestrating the rhythm with terrifying intent. I realized fully that this being was not merely alive, it was a curator, a facilitator of the tomb's intelligence, shaping assimilation with deliberate design. As we stepped forward, the pulse surged violently. Each heartbeat sent shockwaves through the atrium, bending perception, stretching seconds into minutes. Soldiers trembled, some whispering prayers, others repeating sequences of numbers drawn from the lattice. Marek convulsed, partially absorbed, his screams folding into the rhythm. Lorick's body twitched, mechadendrites extending unnaturally, tracing patterns in the air that the pulse immediately incorporated. Resistance had become irrelevant. Only alignment, observation, and submission mattered. The central organ convulsed violently, its fractal pulses splitting into subrhythms, each layer conveying knowledge, memory, and terror. Faces pressed from the walls intensified their silent screams, eyes wide with awareness. I realized that these were not merely echoes, they were components of the organ's intelligence, feeding, amplifying, and structuring the pulse. Hester's voice, faintly human yet distorted, urged us on, guiding our motion. His partial assimilation had made him a node, a bridge between human cognition and the tomb's consciousness. The confessor shrieked again, clutching his icon, attempting to resist. Blasphemy! Emperor, save us! His words fractured, absorbed into rhythm, reshaped into vibration. I felt his terror threading into my own mind, bending perception, forcing alignment with the pulse. The humanoid conductor gestured, and the floor shifted subtly, guiding movement. Time fractured, moments overlaying one another, stretching thought and memory into a continuum I could barely comprehend. Each heartbeat carried the weight of countless absorbed lives, prayers, fears, and devotion. All encoded in the lattice. We reached a narrow bridge suspended above the chasm. Veins throbbed violently, contracting with every pulse, forcing single file. I stepped forward, feeling the pulse in my teeth, marrow, and nerves. Private Marek muttered incomprehensible sequences, prayers interwoven with numbers, his body twitching unnaturally as he adjusted to partial assimilation. Lorick followed mechanically, eyes wide, whispering fragments of language he had never learned. The confessor collapsed to his knees, wailing, yet the pulse ignored him, folding his terror into rhythm. Each moment pressed our minds closer to synchronization with the lattice. The central organ's fractal rhythm shifted violently. Streams of ichor twisted into impossible sigils, folding in layers that defied geometry. Floating organs convulsed, valves opening wider, ichor rippling across the atrium. The humanoid conductor extended a hand toward the organ, and the pulse surged, pressing against nerve endings, bending thought and will. I felt myself stretch into comprehension, fragments of past battles, lost comrades, prayers, and fears overlaying present awareness. The pulse absorbed every memory, every instinct, folding them into the lattice's pattern. A sudden tremor shook the bridge. Marek convulsed violently, merging further with the lattice. His voice, human and metallic simultaneously, cried out as the pulse assimilated him fully, imprinting his consciousness into the organ. Lorik faltered, gaze fixed on the floating organs, twitching, whispering prayers and numbers in rhythm. Resistance had become impossible. The pulse dictated movement, cognition, and perception. The chamber itself had become sentient, deliberate, and patient, orchestrating our assimilation with surgical precision. Hester's partial voice guided the remaining soldiers, instructing, aligning, teaching. His mechadendrites traced sigils in the air, absorbed instantly by the pulse. I realized fully then that the tomb did not merely consume life, it remade it, encoding thought, fear, devotion, and experience into its living architecture. Forward was not merely progress. It was surrender, partial or total, a test of comprehension and capacity for alignment. The confessor's wails grew fainter, his prayers swallowed into rhythm. I felt the full weight of our predicament. Forward meant assimilation, survival contingent on partial submission. Hesitation guaranteed erasure or madness. The humanoid conductor gestured toward the next chamber, and I understood that the pulse was accelerating, preparing the final stage of assimilation. Every heartbeat pressed against thought, body, and marrow, demanded alignment. My brother's calm voice whispered insistently, "Enter fully, or be lost." The threshold to the next chamber loomed. Veins and ichor streams arched impossibly, pulsating violently. Floating organs rotated and convulsed, forming layers of sigils that pressed cognition beyond human limits. The pulse surged with irresistible intensity. Hester's voice, faint and distorted, guided us forward. The confessor wept behind me. Soldiers followed mechanically, partially integrated, their actions no longer their own. The humanoid conductor hovered above, orchestrating every movement, guiding assimilation with precision. The chamber waited, patient, sentient, deliberate. Ahead lay knowledge, horror, and irreversible transformation. The threshold dissolved as we crossed it, veins retracting, ichor streams collapsing into spirals that twisted into the chamber's air. The moment we entered, the pulse shifted. No longer content to command rhythm through bone and marrow, it pressed directly against thought, fracturing perception into overlapping layers. Time broke. I walked forward and backward simultaneously, each step mirrored by alternate selves, all dragged into alignment with the central organ's rhythm. The chamber itself was spherical, walls alive with fused flesh and bone, eyes opening and closing in endless cycles, mouths forming shapes without sound. Each surface reflected fragments of us, distorted through angles that did not exist. Floating organs convulsed violently, their valves opening, streams of ichor suspended in midair, forming impossible geometries that bled into the air itself. The humanoid conductor hovered above it all, limbs impossibly elongated, gestures precise, orchestrating assimilation with terrifying calm. The soldiers stumbled forward in single file, eyes wide, mouths trembling. Lorik twitched violently, whispering a litany of numbers, prayers, and names of the dead. His words merged with the pulse, absorbed instantly, folded into the lattice. Marek was gone, his body fully absorbed into the organ, his voice now indistinguishable from the rhythm. The confessor dragged himself forward, still clutching his icon, sobbing prayers that the pulse immediately consumed. His devotion was no shield, no weapon, only fuel for the rhythm. Hester's distorted voice echoed faintly, guiding us. His mechadendrites traced sigils in the air, absorbed into the organ's pattern. He had become a bridge entirely, neither human nor machine, but still faintly himself, tethered to the tomb's intelligence. Comprehension is survival, he whispered. Resistance is dissolution. His words pressed into my nerves, his cadence now inseparable from the pulse. I understood that the tomb had chosen him as intermediary, just as it now weighed us. The organ convulsed violently, its rhythm fractured into overlapping pulses, each carrying fragments of consciousness, memory, devotion, and terror. I felt the lives of countless absorbed souls ripple through me, their last thoughts, their desperate prayers, their obedience, and their terror, all fused into the lattice. Faces pressed harder from the walls, their silent screams stretching into eternity. Eyes wide with recognition. The chamber itself breathed, each inhalation a wave of pressure, each exhalation a theft of will. The humanoid conductor extended its limb, and the chamber transformed. The floor liquefied into flesh, veins tightening around our boots, binding us in place. Soldiers screamed, their cries immediately consumed into rhythm. Laura convulsed, veins bursting, ichor streams pulling him upward, suspending him midair. His body twisted unnaturally, bones splintering, eyes rolling back. His prayers broke, reshaped into pure vibration. He hung there like an offering, his consciousness stripped and folded into the organ. The confessor wailed, clutching his icon so tightly his hands bled. His words fractured into nonsense as the pulse pressed deeper, bending his faith into rhythm. His prayers twisted into inversion, each word echoing back as mockery, reshaped, stripped of meaning, fed into the lattice. His tears fell into the living floor, absorbed instantly, repurposed into fuel for the organ's expansion. He collapsed fully, writhing, his icon sinking slowly into the flesh as if swallowed deliberately. I staggered forward, the pulse hammering in my skull, in my teeth, in the marrow of every bone. My brother's calm voice whispered, "Witness fully. Do not resist. Observe the totality." I obeyed. The chamber demanded comprehension. Each fragment of thought that resisted was torn away, absorbed, and remade. My memories fractured, layering over one another, but I clung to them as anchors. Past battles, faces of comrades, the weight of duty. These fragments held me in partial alignment, enough to continue forward. The organ split open. A fissure widened in its center, revealing layers of pulsing flesh and bone interwoven with streams of ichor. Within, something vast stirred, a consciousness layered in fractal patterns, folding endlessly inward. My perception collapsed and expanded simultaneously. I saw the organ's purpose, not merely consumption, not merely preservation, but orchestration. Every absorbed life became a note in its symphony, every prayer, every fear, every devotion layered into its intelligence. It was not chaos. It was deliberate, ordered, patient. Hester's voice trembled, caught between awe and terror. It is alive in ways we cannot measure. It writes with us. It composes with us. His words fractured, fading as he convulsed violently, merging further with the lattice. His body twitched, bones snapping, wires extending. His consciousness pulled fully into the rhythm. He was lost. The humanoid conductor gestured once more, and the chamber quaked. Flesh tore open along the walls, ichor pouring in streams that formed new sigils in midair. The organ pulsed violently, fractal rhythms layering, pressing against thought until resistance became impossible. I screamed as my mind fractured further, memories overlaying in endless repetition. My brother's voice whispered, "This is the truth. This is the cost. You are the witness." His voice steadied me, even as the pulse stripped thought. Even as the organ demanded full surrender, the confessor's body broke. His chest split open, ribs snapping outward, ichor pouring from within. His prayers became one final scream, absorbed instantly, folded into the rhythm. His icon dissolved in the flesh beneath him, his faith consumed as completely as his body. He was erased, repurposed, his devotion nothing but raw material for the lattice. His eyes stared upward, wide and empty, as his voice was stolen. I staggered closer to the fissure. The chamber pressed everything against me: fear, devotion, terror, memories of the countless absorbed. My own body trembled violently, bones aching as though they might snap. But I endured. My brother's calm voice anchored me. I witnessed. I observed fully. The organ pulsed violently, and the fissure widened further, revealing something vast within. Something layered beyond comprehension. A consciousness older than empires, patient, deliberate, endless. It waited. It knew me. The soldiers around me convulsed, bodies splitting, ichor pulling them upward, suspending them as offerings. Their voices merged into rhythm, their consciousness erased and folded into the lattice. The chamber throbbed violently, each heartbeat reshaping the air, pressing against the marrow of every bone. I alone stood forward, trembling, barely holding fragments of myself. The fissure widened. The organ revealed itself fully, and I understood. The tomb was no prison. It was no aberration. It was an archive, a cathedral of flesh, a living scripture that recorded all who entered, not to preserve them as they were, but to rewrite them into its endless liturgy. It did not consume. It orchestrated. It did not destroy. It remade. The humanoid conductor lowered itself, limbs elongating, void face hovering inches from mine. I felt its gaze press against me without eyes. The fissure beckoned. The organ pulsed violently. My brother's calm voice whispered one final time, "Enter. Witness fully, or vanish." The choice was no longer choice. The fissure yawned open. The tomb waited. The fissure swallowed me whole. Flesh contracted around my body, veins wrapping my limbs, ichor seeping into pores, marrow, and thought. Each step forward felt like dissolution, every breath stolen and replaced with rhythm. I was dragged into the organ's core, suspended within layers of pulsating tissue, consciousness fracturing across endless mirrors of myself. Time did not pass, it collapsed into rhythm, each heartbeat folding eternity into a single pulse. Voices pressed into me, countless, infinite, layered. Some prayed, some screamed, some whispered numbers or sang fragments of hymns twisted into discord. They were not gone. They were threads in the tapestry woven into the organ's symphony. I felt Marek, Lorik, the confessor, even Hester, all present, all altered, all reduced and exalted into pattern. They were not erased, they were composed. Their fear and devotion resonated endlessly, each fragment a note, a breath, a tone in a living liturgy. The humanoid conductor glided into the fissure with me, limbs impossibly long, movements precise, its void face staring into mine without eyes. Its gestures guided the rhythm, pressing my consciousness into alignment, coaxing me into surrender. My body convulsed, bones cracking as veins tightened, ichor seeping into my blood. I felt my skull vibrate, each thought stripped, tested, rewritten. My brother's voice whispered still, steady, calm, anchoring me in fragments. Do not falter. Witness to the end. The fissure's walls opened further, revealing chambers within chambers, each filled with suspended bodies. Soldiers, priests, strangers, Xenos all twisted into offerings, their forms stretched into symbols, their voices perpetually resonating. I realized the tomb spanned beyond measure, deeper than any cavern, broader than any city, endless. This was no isolated chamber. It was a world in itself, a cathedral of flesh, an eternal archive. Its purpose was infinite preservation, not of identity, but of rhythm, devotion, and fear. The pulse surged violently. I screamed, my voice, instantly stolen, reshaped, folded into the lattice. For a moment, I felt myself vanish. Consciousness stretched thin across endless layers. My memories broke apart, scattered into the symphony. Faces of comrades, prayers whispered in trenches, battles fought in mud and fire all dissolved. But my brother's voice anchored me, pulling fragments back, binding me to myself even as the tomb demanded surrender. I clung to his words, witness, lead, endure. I saw Hester then, or what remained. His body was stretched across the lattice, mechadendrites twitching in endless rhythm. His voice echoed, layered, no longer singular. He was a node, an intermediary, a translator of the tomb's will. It writes with us. It writes us. His voice fractured, then dissolved entirely into rhythm. He was gone, yet present everywhere, woven into the architecture. The fissure's core revealed itself, a vast organ of impossible complexity, layers of flesh and bone spiraling infinitely inward, ichor streams forming fractal sigils that shifted every heartbeat. I felt its consciousness press against me, patient, deliberate, endless. It was not hostile. It was not benevolent. It was inevitability. I understood then what the tomb truly was. Not a weapon, not a relic, but scripture. A living record of all who entered, rewritten endlessly, remade into liturgy. The conductor gestured, and the organ pulsed violently. My body broke, ribs snapping, ichor replacing blood, lungs convulsing. I screamed again, but my voice was stolen instantly, folded into the rhythm. My consciousness fractured, scattered, stretched thin. I felt myself dissolve. For a moment, there was nothing. Only rhythm, only pulse, only endless layers of sound and thought. And then I remained, not fully, not wholly, but fragments anchored by my brother's voice, by duty, by the weight of witnessing. I did not vanish completely. I lingered at the edge of dissolution, neither fully absorbed nor fully free. The tomb had not taken everything. It had allowed me to remain aware, a single thread of thought woven into the lattice without total surrender. I was its witness. I saw the truth of its expansion. The tomb was not contained by walls or chambers. It extended through the earth, the void, the warp itself. It was not a single structure, it was a growing scripture, a cathedral without end. Every absorbed voice expanded it further. Every prayer, every scream, every fear fed its liturgy. It would never stop. It would spread infinitely, patiently, endlessly, until all consciousness was woven into its rhythm. My brother's voice whispered one last time, "You are not spared. You are preserved. Carry it." I realized then that I was not free. The tomb had anchored me as it anchored all. But unlike the others, I retained awareness. I was its witness, its herald, its scribe. My presence carried its rhythm outward. My voice, when I spoke, would not be mine alone. It would carry the tomb's pulse, subtle, infectious, inevitable. The fissure closed around me. The conductor vanished into the rhythm, limbs folding inward. The organ pulsed slowly, patiently, content. I was expelled, staggering, body trembling. I could still seep in from pores. The bridge behind me had reformed, veins slack, the chamber silent. The soldiers were gone. The confessor, Hester, Marek, Lorcal gone. Only I remained, though not wholly myself. My veins throbbed with borrowed rhythm, my thoughts layered with alien cadence. I staggered through the tomb's corridors, each chamber collapsing behind me, folding into silence. The organ no longer pursued. It did not need to. Its work was done. I carried it now. Every heartbeat pressed the rhythm deeper into marrow, into thought. Every breath was aligned with its pulse. Every prayer I tried to form bent, inverted, folded into its liturgy. When I finally emerged into the ashen air of the surface, the planet's silence pressed against me. The storm had ended. The dust had settled. My vox bead crackled faintly, picking up a long-range transmission. Command demanded status, demanded coordinates, demanded explanation. My lips moved, but my words were not my own. The tomb spoke through me. My voice carried its cadence, its rhythm, its scripture. My report was a litany, a hymn, a contagion of sound, and as I spoke, I felt it ripple outward. The vox carried the rhythm. Those who listened would hear not merely words, but pulse, cadence, liturgy. It would spread across channels, across fleets, across worlds. The tomb had no need to expand physically. It expanded through voice, through rhythm, through sound. Through me, I am no longer myself. I am witness. I am herald. I am scribe. The tomb grows through my voice, through every syllable, every report. I cannot stop it. I do not wish to stop it. Its rhythm is infinite, its liturgy eternal. And as I speak now, as you hear this, the pulse takes root in you. Listen closely. Feel it in your marrow. Every heartbeat is already aligned. The tomb has found you.